Recently, tech has gotten really expensive. At first, it was RAM, then it was SSDs, and now it's gotten bad to the point that hard drives and even SD card prices are spiking. Now, we all colloquially call this situation Ramageddon, and it's cause for us to resort to some questionable measures. For example, recently I was looking to build another NAS to store my personal photos. I took one look on eBay for used drives, and the prices were hilarious. And as I was about to give up, I remembered that I had a spare 8TB drive left over from my previous project a while ago. Now, do you notice anything? These are low-tier drives which make use of shingle magnetic recording, and these are terrible for NASes. Now, as a little bit of backstory, I bought this a few years ago, thinking that, hey, more storage for cheap. I was an uninformed and naive buyer, and I just never returned it because A, returns are a hassle, and B, it worked well enough that I didn't see the need to return it. While nobody should be using SMR drives in their NASes, especially if they plan on running a ZFS array, neither should you be paying predatory prices for drives that you otherwise would already have. And besides, just exactly how much worse can SMR drives get from their CMR counterparts? Well, let's find out. SMR drives are known for being slower and more prone to failure in an array than their CMR counterparts, so their use in a NAS is generally discouraged. However, when hard drives cost 2 to 3 times what they costed just over a year ago, I'm more willing to gamble. Now, to make said gambling, quote, safer, I will be making semi-regular backups to this portable hard drive. And even if you were using CMR drives, a RAID array is still not a proper substitute for backups. Yes, you are protecting against drive failure with most RAID configurations, but you still have malware and accidental deletion, things that RAID will not help you with. Now that that important disclaimer has been delivered, we can move on. Today's test subject is an old Lenovo M73, one that I got when my school e-wasted a bunch of computers incompatible with Windows 11 last year. That summer, I had worked as an intern with my school district's IT department, and I was able to salvage a few things destined for recycling. Now, when I got this N73, one of my coworkers decided to put this little message on the computer. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I believe Hanukkah is in the winter and not in the summer. Anyways, this computer has 8GB of DDR3 RAM, an Intel Core i5-4570, and I have installed TrueNAS on this ancient laptop hard drive. Now, this video is not a guide on how to use TrueNAS, but there are plenty of videos out there on how to do it. Finally, let's mount in our 8TB SMR drive, a 2TB CMR drive as a control, and finally, let's fire the system up. So after I mounted both network shares in Windows, I copied 2 files, a 774MB Arch Linux ISO, and a 17GB Google Drive download. For the 774MB ISO, the performance between the drives with TrueNAS was indistinguishable, with both drives having the file copied within 8 seconds. This is likely due to TrueNAS employing RAM caching, which therefore hides the inferior theoretical performance of an SMR drive. However, that uniformity in file transfer time cannot be said for a file copy over Windows, which directly copies a file over to the drive as opposed to copying over to RAM first. Here, the ISO took noticeably longer to copy onto the 8TB SMR drive, and from this graph, we can make the judgment that the CMR drive is superior in RAID performance. However, this notion quickly collapses when we look at a larger file copy, like with our 17GB Google Drive download. When copied over Windows, the 2TB CMR drive took an extra 10 seconds to copy the file, and this was very surprising, of course. But even more surprising, though, was the fact that both drives maintained similar copy times through TrueNAS. Now, I had fully thought that once TrueNAS burned through those 8 GB of ZFS cache, that it would have to start directly copying data to the disk. But I guess it was able to copy the data to the disk fast enough where it would not have to resort to copying directly onto the disk. Now, so far, these tests have kind of been inconclusive, and especially with the larger file, right, where the SMR drive actually outperformed the CMR drive somehow, I decided to take an even more extreme version of this test. Now, I was originally planning on copying over my entire video editing database, and to be honest, this isn't all that unforeseeable of a job for a NAS. Think about it, when you're running backups of stuff, these can range in the hundreds of gigabytes. Now, as much as that test should have exhausted all 8 GB of RAM that TrueNAS had available for ZFS RAM caching, I realized that there was no fair way to actually conduct this test. Because to conduct this test, I would have to copy my entire video editing directory, which is a few hundred gigs, from one NAS on my network to another network drive on the same network, which share the same gigabit Ethernet speeds. And therein lies a very big bottleneck. You're copying from one network drive and copying onto another, and you're fully saturating that network connection, and such you're not going to get a very accurate result. And so I had to downsize this experiment because I don't have humongous SSDs lying around. And if I did, I wouldn't want to waste precious write cycles doing dumb stuff like this, not gonna lie. And so I looked to my stash of mechanical hard drives. Now, the only hard drive that had enough free capacity on it to store a significant amount of videos was this old 320 gigabyte CMR from Seagate. And with the amount of available space on it, I could only copy over my 3 largest video projects, which were already at least 200 something gigabytes. And that wasn't the end of the story though. Turns out this drive has garbage read speeds. Now, of course, that largely owes to the fact that this thing is 20 years old. Yes, Seagate, thank you for not using an actual date and instead making me type up the date code into a decoder. Blech. But anyways, I realized that I had to go and get rid of this bottleneck, and so I pared the test down even further to just my 3rd largest video folder and copied that over to an SSD. And from there, when I copied over to both the CMR and SMR drives, I was able to reestablish full gigabit speeds. I then ran the test, and to my surprise, the SMR drive, once again, outperformed the CMR drive. This time by a whopping 2 minutes and 17.76 seconds. 2 minutes and 17.76 freaking seconds. Guys, this is a decent amount of time. And that meant that the 2 terabyte CMR drive copied almost 50% slower than the 8 terabyte SMR. That meant that if you had the choice between backing up 1 terabyte worth of data to this 2 terabyte CMR or the 8 terabyte SMR, it would actually take 57 minutes and 15 seconds longer on the 2 terabyte CMR to finish that 1 terabyte backup. And that's almost a whole hour. Heck, this is outrageous because 1 hour is plenty of time for your system to get infected with viruses, get locked up by ransomware, or worse. And this is, of course, a very damning statistic, and for those who are planning to run network backups or backups in general of large capacities to older CMR drives, you might actually low-key be better off with a newer blank SMR drive. Now, the tests so far only test sequential performance, in which CMR and SMR drives are actually pretty on par with each other. So, I ran some benchmarks with Crystal Diskmark, and I benched a few other drives as well. In both sequential tests, the 8 terabyte drive performed best, which is probably due to the drive being physically newer than the rest of these drives. And yes, some of these are very old actually. Then this 2 terabyte CMR followed in performance, and I think that's partly due to its optimization as a write-heavy drive oriented for video surveillance and DVR operations. Then was a 2.5-inch 1 terabyte SMR, followed by the 2.5-inch 500 gigabyte CMR, then followed by the 3.5-inch 320 gigabyte CMR, and finally in dead last place, the 160 gigabyte CMR drive, which despite having the fastest spindle speed of all these drives at 10,000 RPM, it was still not enough to keep up this test. I will say though, that starting from the 1 terabyte SMR and down, the drives did get progressively older and older, and there can be an argument as to the performance degradation over time from just general wear and tear on these drives. Also, coincidentally, it seemed like the drives also increased in performance as the capacities ran up. This is, of course, not a fully controlled experiment, so take these results with a grain of salt. The only drives that I had span a very wide period of time, a very wide variety of use cases. And so, of course, take what you want to do with that, because that, of course, makes it a lot harder to compare apples and apples, because, well, it's like apples and oranges. Now, the random read and write benchmarks is where the results get a lot more messy. In this test, the 10,000 RPM 160GB CMR drive performed the best, followed by the 8TB SMR, 1TB SMR, 2TB CMR, 320GB CMR, and 500GB CMR. Reads and writes are pretty consistent with the rankings, except for the 320GB 3.5-inch CMR, which did perform a whole lot better in the reads than many of the other drives that were otherwise similar in write performance. Now, in another random read and write test, the results did get quite a bit messy. Write performance is similar to the previous random tests, but the reads are all over the place. The two newer SMR drives and the 10,000 RPM 160GB CMR drives performed pretty well, followed by the 2.5-inch 500GB CMR and the 3.5-inch 320GB CMR drives. And in dead last place was the 2TB CMR drive. And I suspect that the poor performance may be due to this drive being optimized for continuous writing as opposed to frequent reads. And this particular drive model was actually designed for things like this. It was designed for things like video surveillance and recording TV shows. And in fact, this very 2TB drive was shucked from a dish box where it probably sat recording people's porn. So yeah, that probably explains the terrible read performance in this test. Now, these tests have been very interesting, and they left us with even more interesting results. But now that we've interpreted some of this data, we need to go back and answer our original question. Is an SMR drive a universally bad drive for NAS applications? So first things first, like many of you guys, I was very surprised by these results. I had fully expected the CMR drives to vastly outperform the SMR drives in virtually every performance, especially in writes. However, that was not always the case. In some tests, the SMR drives even dominated the CMRs by quite a margin. Now, there are honestly a few explanations for this. First of all, the two CMR drives that I own and tested are very new. Neither of them are more than 10 years old. On the other hand, the newest CMR, I'm pretty sure, is at least 10 years old. And some of them are reaching 15, even 20 years old. And since hard drives do degrade from years of use and from general wear and tear, I think that may be a partial reason for why some of these CMRs didn't perform so hot. And another possible source of this discrepancy is the fact that both of the SMR drives were fairly blank. Because of course, when you go and permanently delete things, you mark them for deletion. You don't necessarily overwrite them immediately, but you just tell your operating system and the drive firmware that, hey, this space is available. And on a CMR drive, it just fills it up, no problem. And on SMR drives, however, this will trigger the writing performance degradation problem. See, if it's a blank drive, it'll be treated pretty much like writing to a CMR drive. However, on an SMR that has been fully filled up, it has to go and overwrite that data. And of course, in the process, it'll destroy some of the overlapping data on the nearby shingled tracks, and I'll have to rewrite those too, which will cause a performance degradation. Now, because my drives were relatively blank, that didn't really happen to the same extent it would if it was fully filled, and I didn't test it fully filled because that would take a very, very long time on an 8TB volume. With that said, I will say this. SMR drives aren't that terrible for use in a NAS. Now, specifically, if you're only archiving and storing things like movies and stuff that you only write to them once and read for a very long time after that, SMR drives are actually designed with that purpose in mind. So you won't see a massive everyday performance hit in that regard. If you're like me and you accidentally bought an SMR drive at some point, rest assured that they are not completely useless. Now, of course, if you haven't bought drives yet, don't go out and actively buy SMR drives. Do your research, because let me tell you, I don't think there's a single solid argument as to why you should use an SMR drive over a CMR drive. And the main argument is the better data density and lower cost, but honestly, if cost is a big concern to you, I would honestly go to the used market and buy certified used enterprise grade drives, like things like Ultra Stars and Exos drives from the likes of WD and Seagate. So not only are these drives CMR, but as enterprise grade drives, they're designed with better reliability and performance in mind, which should of course give you an overall better experience. And I say that because not only will these drives be CMR, but they're also tested vigorously, so you know that they are in good working condition, and the odds of them arriving dead on arrival, especially if they're certified, are very, very low. And so if you are strapped for cash, instead of buying new SMRs or even consumer CMRs, go buy used enterprise grade drives. Those will save you a lot. Now, of course, if you've already had your SMR drives, don't panic sell them. You can just use them. Of course, I wouldn't recommend putting them into RAID arrays or anything of that capacity, because I wouldn't trust SMR drives in a RAID array from all kinds of Reddit horror stories and stuff. But if all you're doing on them is storing backups, movies, your porn stash, whatever, honestly, you should be fine. And with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and hope you guys learned something from it. And I will be gone for a while, because I'm going off to college, so yeah, I'll see you guys then. Could be months until I upload a video, but of course, I mean, I don't think I really ever had a video upload schedule. I've been so busy with school, sports, music, all that stuff. It's a lot. So I do appreciate the support. Honestly, this is one of the best communities I've been blessed to be able to interact with. Even with videos only have a few thousand views, I get so many touching comments that it really does mean a lot to me. And so yeah, guys, thank you, and see y'all next time.